The numbers on the display kept climbing, and Overlord Drevon could not make them stop. 900 first. Then more, arriving in total silence. No engine flare on the sensors, no warning chime from the deck crew, just ships filling a patch of space that had been empty a heartbeat before. Not one of them had a weapon powered on. Dravon's claws pressed into the obsidian rail of the command deck until the black stone creaked. He had called for reinforcements 20 minutes ago. 340 ships, his own, summoned to finish what should already have been finished. Now the humans were answering a call he never sent. Report, he said. His voice did not shake. 27 years of unbroken victory did not shake for a display screen. Tactical Officer Vorn did not look up from his console. Sir, the Shadow Fleet, they were waiting for the reinforcements. They wanted us to call for more. The word shadow sat wrong in Drevon's mouth, even unspoken. He had heard rumors, half a Senate cycle of dismissed border reports, gossip from trade captains, an assassinated smuggler who'd claimed the human systems hid something behind their brown dwarfs. He had filed all of it under superstition. Weak species told stories to feel less weak. He touched the scar on his jaw. 27 years old, a thin white line from a blade that should have killed him and hadn't. He touched it before every campaign. He touched it now. The count kept rising behind him on the display, a soft chime marking each new wave, and none of the waves were slowing down. They called for more, and this was what answered. I wish I could tell you. Dravon looked away first. He didn't. Stay close. This only gets worse for him. 287 years earlier, give or take a season, the Galactic Senate chamber smelled like ozone, polished stone, and the particular staleness of 4,700 years of decisions nobody remembered making. 6,200 seats climbed in concentric rings toward a crystal ceiling that showed the slow burn of the Veil Nebula, indifferent to everything happening underneath it. Overlord Drevon stood at the speaker's dais that day too, younger by nearly 3 centuries of galactic reckoning, though his species aged slower than most in the chamber. He had not yet touched the scar out of habit. He touched it now only when he wanted the room to remember what he'd survived. The human systems hold 8 worlds and contribute nothing to Senate defense quotas, he said. This is not conquest. This is correction. Elder Seraphine sat in the highest row, where the oldest members always sat, and said nothing. She had watched other species make this argument about other species. She knew the shape it took before the vote even opened. The vote came back 822 to 14. Procedural Officer Thren, a narrow gray Mavari with a stylus, he clicked when he was pleased with himself, had denied Seraphine's registry request 3 times that week alone. Official reason each time, procedural backlog. He clicked the stylus once more as the vote closed, satisfied, and never once wondered what the backlog was hiding. It was hiding 900 ships. Admiral Kalen Rourke did not attend the vote. He was 59 years old, 31 years into Earth Defense Command, and he was on the bridge of the Vanguard, checking a watch. It was a plain thing, silver-cased, the leather band gone soft and dark with age. It ticked 47 times a minute. Steady as it had been the day his father wore it into the void on Earth's first interstellar crossing. Rourke pressed it to his ear. 47 ticks. He checked it twice before every order, the way he had for 31 years, and he had not given an order yet. Coffee's cold, said Captain Maddox, handing him a dented metal mug anyway, same as 2 hours ago. Rourke drank it without comment. Commander Vex crossed the bridge with a data slate held low against her hip, the posture of someone who already knew the answer wasn't going to be popular. They denied Seraphine's registry request a 3rd time this morning, she said. Official reasons procedural backlog again. Unofficial reason, she set the slate on the console between them. The full registry would show 900 ships that aren't supposed to exist on paper. They're not hiding anything from her, Rourke said. He didn't raise his eyes from the display. They're hiding it from themselves. Nobody in that chamber wants to be the one who finds out we were ready. Vex didn't answer that. She'd worked under Rourke long enough to know when a sentence wasn't looking for a reply. Technical Officer Marlowe leaned over from the sensor station, young enough that his voice still climbed half an octave when something surprised him. Admiral, the Draconis fleet just crossed into Sector 12, 1,200 ships. 22 capital, the rest support. Distance from the shadow line. 4.3 light-years out from the brown dwarf. They don't have a visual on us. They don't have anything on us. Rourke set the mug down. He checked the watch again, not because he needed to, but because his hands wanted something to do while the rest of him stayed still. 47 ticks. He'd learned patience from a man who'd crossed the dark in a ship with no name and less fuel than the trip needed, and who had never once talked about being afraid. Sector 12's boundary was a stretch of void. The charts called the Sargasso Reach, 4 light-years of nothing, no registered stars, no registered populations, nothing worth a name. Which was exactly why the shipyards had gone there 287 years ago, buried in asteroid fields nobody had bothered to survey twice. Nobody surveys nothing twice. That had always been the plan. On the open channel, the same one every fleet in the sector could hear, if they were listening, Overlord Dravon's voice arrived, flat and unhurried. The voice of a man reading a sentence he'd read 100 times before with the same result. You have 5 minutes to stand aside. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will be catalogued. Rourke listened to the whole thing. He did not answer. He checked his watch. 47 ticks. He said nothing at all, and on the Vanguard's bridge, nobody asked him why, because 31 years had taught them that silence, from this man, was never empty. 5 minutes passed. Dravon transmitted again, this time to the Senate relay, satisfaction plain in every syllable. No resistance encountered. 42,000 settlers will be transported within 60 days. Then, almost as an afterthought, he signaled his reserve wing. 340 ships holding at the jump point behind him, called forward simply because he could. Vex watched the new contacts bloom on her display and felt something cold settle behind her sternum. Admiral, they're calling for more. Rourke set the mug down for the last time that shift. Wake the protocol, he said. Somewhere in the buried yards of the Sargasso Reach, in tunnels nobody had surveyed twice, something that had been waiting 287 years began, at last, to move. Marlowe's console went first. Contact, he said, and his voice climbed the half-octave that always gave away his age. First wave, 100 holes, 4-meter emergence interval, right on the mark. Vex leaned over his shoulder. On the display, 100 points of light bloomed out of nothing at the edge of the brown dwarf's shadow, arranged already in formation, as if they'd been standing there in the dark the whole time and someone had simply turned on the lights. They had. Rourke didn't move from where he stood. He checked the watch. 47 ticks. Second wave, he said. Not a question. Second wave, Marlowe confirmed, and the count doubled behind him, silent as the first. Then it doubled again. Then once more, until the shadow of the brown dwarf wasn't dark anymore. It was full of ships that had no registry entry, no procedural file, nothing that had ever made it past Officer Thren's stylus and his 3 denials. Somewhere in the Sargasso Reach, 287 years of a shipyard nobody had surveyed twice finished emptying itself into open space. Admiral, came a voice on the bridge speaker, thin with the distance and the static of an intercepted channel. Dravon's tactical relay, picked up and pushed through by the Vanguard's signals crew. A voice none of them recognized, young by its pitch, cracking under a weight it hadn't trained for. Sir, they have more than we brought. They have, sir. I can't get a stable count. The number keeps. The channel cut. Somebody on the other end had killed it rather than let the fleet hear their own officer stop being able to count. Rourke set the watch down against his wrist and pressed it there instead of to his ear, a smaller gesture, private. Hold position, he said. Let them arrive into it, 4 light-years away, and a slower relay behind. On the Senate station, Elder Seraphine received the news the way she received most news now, sitting very still, a data slate in her lap. Nobody fires unless fired on. Nobody moves unless I move. That's it. Maddox asked, and it wasn't a challenge. It was something closer to disbelief. We've got the whole reserve wing arriving into the middle of that in under a minute. That's the point, Rourke said. Her 600-year-old hands folded on top of it as if that could keep the words from moving. Registry incomplete, the report read, in the same flat administrative language Officer Thren had used to deny her 3 times that week. Anomalous fleet contact. Origin unconfirmed. Scale unconfirmed. Advise caution. She had asked for the registry because she'd wanted proof. Something to hold up in the chamber and say, look, they were never as small as we told ourselves. She got the proof now, unrequested, delivered by the only method that ever actually worked, the thing showing up. Procedural Officer Thren arrived at her seat within the hour. stylus in hand, already reaching for a form. Elder Seraphine, given the anomaly, I can expedite your original registry request if you'd like to resubmit. No, she said. He blinked. No, I don't need it anymore. She held the slate out to him instead, so he could see the number climbing on it in real time, ships arriving faster than the display could label them. I need you to understand what your backlog actually protected you from knowing. Thren looked at the screen for a long moment. He did not click the stylus. Back on Dravon's bridge, the Nightfall's main display had stopped updating cleanly, not broken, simply overwhelmed, painting new contacts in stuttering half-second bursts because the software beneath it had never been built to count this fast. Vorn stood at his station with both hands flat on the console, as if holding it down would keep the numbers from rising. Sir, he said, the reserve wing, they're 30 seconds from arrival. Then they arrive. Dravon said. Into that, Vorn didn't point. He didn't need to. Draven touched the scar on his jaw, 27 years old. He had touched it before the assassin's blade nearly finished him, and he had lived. He had touched it before 11 campaigns, and he had won every one. He touched it now and felt for the first time in any of those years that the gesture wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. They wanted us to call for more, Vorn said. Quieter now, almost to himself. That's what this is. That's the whole trick. They weren't hiding a fleet. The reserve wing dropped out of transit exactly where it had been ordered to. They were hiding a trap shaped like patience. No warning had been given. No demand had been made. No shot had been fired by either side, and somehow that silence was the loudest thing on either bridge. 340 ships arriving in tight formation at the edge of Sector 12 and found itself already inside a crescent of human hulls that curved around the entire Draconis position like a hand closing slow enough to feel every finger. On the Vanguard, Marlowe read the final count off his scope in a voice that had stopped climbing and gone very flat instead. The sound of someone too tired with adrenaline to be excited anymore. Full emergence complete, Admiral. Formation holding. Nobody's moved a weapon. Good, Rourke said. Captain Maddox looked at him sideways. That's the whole plan. Show up and wait. That was always the whole plan, Rourke said. 287 years of it. We didn't build the protocol to win a fight. We built it so we'd never have to start one. He checked the watch one more time. 47 ticks, steady as always, steadier than anything else in the sector right now. Dravon's going to say something on the open channel in the next few minutes. I want them to have both sides of it. The bridge went quiet after that, not the tense quiet from before, but something else, the particular stillness of people who have just watched a plan 2 centuries in the making complete itself exactly on schedule. When he does, I want it recorded, every word, his and mine both. Why his? Vex asked. Because in about 200 years, somebody's going to teach a history lesson about the day an empire found out what waiting looks like, Rourke said. And don't yet know what to do with their hands, now that there's nothing left to prepare. It didn't last. Admiral, Marlowe said, and something in his tone brought every head up at once. Draven's transmitting, open channel, all frequencies. Nobody had fired, nobody had spoken. Nobody had moved, and now, at last, somebody was about to. Rourke set the mug down, checked the watch one final time before this, and nodded once toward the comms officer. Patch it through, he said. Let's hear what 27 years of never losing sounds like when it finally does. This is not a retreat, Dravon said, and the words went out on every frequency in the sector at once. This is a recalibration of engagement terms. The ascendancy does not withdraw. On the Vanguard's bridge, nobody moved. Rourke listened to the whole thing the way he'd listened to the ultimatum hours before. Still unhurried, the watch ticking against his wrist under his sleeve where nobody but him could feel it.
He's stalling,
Maddox said quietly. He's talking, Rourke said. Let him. Draven kept going, and the longer he talked, the more the words seemed to be aimed less at the humans and more at the Senate relay recording every syllable for the history that hadn't happened yet. He spoke of tactical prudence. He spoke of a revised assessment of theater conditions. He did not, at any point, use the word lost. Rourke waited until the transmission ended before he pressed the comm himself. You called for more, he said. We brought more. On the Senate station, 4 light years and a slower relay away, the chamber that had voted 822-14 sat in a silence so complete that Ambassador Lysandra, 187 years old and famously unshakable. That was your mistake. 6 words. No threat behind them, no volume, nothing that needed to be. Ashley turned in her seat to look at Seraphine. Seraphine didn't look back. She was watching the display at the center of the floor, where the human formation still held, unmoving, unfired, simply present, a fact instead of an argument. They didn't build a fleet, she said, to no one in particular, or maybe to Thren, who was standing close enough to hear. They built a guarantee, and they never once needed to cash it before today. Thren didn't reach for his stylus. He hadn't reached for it since the report came in. The vote total on the wall, the one that had stood since morning, 822 in favor, 14 against, meant something different now than it had when the session opened. 14 species had sent observers to the human systems over the decades. 14 species had said nothing about what they'd seen. Now the whole chamber understood why, not fear of being wrong, but the older, colder fear of finding out you'd been wrong for 287 years, and nobody had bothered to check. He reached up and touched the scar on his jaw, the old habit, the ritual that had carried him through 11 campaigns and out the far side of an assassin's blade, and for the first time since Vorn had served under him. Back on the Nightfall, Vorn kept his hands flat on the console, the same posture he'd held since the reserve wing arrived, boxed inside the human crescent. "Sir? Orders?" Dravon didn't answer right away. The gesture looked like exactly what it was. A man checking whether an old wound still meant what it used to mean. It didn't. Today. He touched it anyway. "Hold formation," Dravon said finally. "Nobody fires without my order. That's what they're doing," Vorn said. "Holding. Not firing. I'm aware of what they're doing." The words came out harder than he'd meant them, and he heard it too late to take the edge off. He straightened instead, folded his hands behind his back, the command posture he'd used since his first campaign. "We assess. We do not retreat under assessment." Vorn said nothing to that. He'd said the true thing already. They wanted us to call them, and he'd said it once, and he didn't see a reason to say it again in different words. He went back to his console and watched the human fleet not move, and found that the not moving was somehow harder to look away from than an attack would have been. Aboard the Vanguard, Rourke set the mug down on the console rail. The coffee in it gone cold an hour ago and forgotten longer than that. He didn't drink it. He just held the handle a moment, the small ordinary weight of it, while Marlowe's console blinked with formation status updates that hadn't changed in 20 minutes and weren't going to. "Admiral," Vex said, "Sector Command wants a status update." "Full Senate relays watching too now." Word spreading. "Send them what they're already seeing," Rourke said. "Nothing's changed. That's the update. Nothing's going to change until they decide it does." He checked the watch. 47 ticks, steady under his sleeve, the same rhythm his father had carried into a void with less fuel than the crossing needed, he thought. Not for the first time that shift, that his father had never gotten to see whether the waiting paid off. He died believing it might, and building toward a day he wouldn't live to watch. Rourke was watching it now for both of them, and he didn't say that out loud, because there was nobody left to say it to who'd understand exactly what it cost. The mundane minutes stretched. Somewhere behind him, Maddox ate a ration bar in 3 unhurried bites, because it was there, and because waiting on a bridge didn't stop a person from being hungry, and the ordinariness of it sat strange against everything else in the room. Then Marlowe's voice cracked the quiet, and this time it wasn't the censor board. "Admiral, the reserve wing, their formations shifting, not attacking, their engines are cycling down." Vex looked up sharp. "Standing down. I don't know what it is." Marlowe's hands moved fast over the console, cross-checking. "It's not a stand-down pattern. It's not a combat pattern either. It's like they're—" He trailed off, searching for the word. "That's a fuse." And then, from the comm station, a voice nobody on the Vanguard's bridge had heard speak once that entire shift, the junior signals officer who'd been silently logging every transmission since the mission began. "Like they're waiting to see what their own commander does next. Same as we're waiting to see what he does." Rourke's eyes didn't leave the display. "2 fleets holding their breath at the same time," he said, half to himself. "That's not a stalemate." A young man named Osei, who Rourke had exchanged maybe a dozen words with in 3 years of service, cleared his throat. "Sir, I've been pulling the timestamp on Dravon's original ultimatum against the timestamp on our full emergence." He turned in his seat, and something in his face said he understood exactly how much weight the next sentence carried. "Under 15 seconds, Admiral. From his first ship count to our full formation holding position." Their tactical software didn't just struggle. It never had a chance to catch up in the first place. The bridge went quiet again, but it was a different quiet than before. The quiet of a number nobody had said out loud, yet finally landing, small and exact, and somehow more frightening than the size of the fleet itself. Somewhere out past the crescent, on a bridge lit by an alien blue that had never once needed to consider losing, Overlord Dravon was still holding his hands behind his back. Rourke looked at Osei for a long moment. "Log that," he said. "Word for word. That's going in the record too." He checked the watch one more time. 47 ticks. Steady. Still refusing the order that both fleets were now waiting on him to give, and the silence between the two commanders had stopped being a pause. It had started being an answer. Dravon lowered his hands. It was such a small motion that Vorn almost missed it, the command posture broken, the fingers unlacing behind his back and coming to rest, empty, at his sides. 27 years of never once standing this way in front of a crew. "Sir, log the reserve wing's engines fully cycled down," Dravon said. His voice had lost the flatness from before. It was quieter now, and stranger for it. "Then transmit to the human flagship. Open channel." "What's the message?" Dravon touched the scar on his jaw one last time. He held his fingers there a moment, as if waiting for it to answer him the way it always had, and when it didn't, he let his hand fall. "Tell them we're not firing," he said. "Tell them we never were." On the Vanguard, Osei caught the transmission before it finished arriving and read the header off his console, and for a moment nobody breathed. Rourke checked the watch. 47 ticks. Steady, same as always, same as it had been through every silence that shift. "Confirmed, Admiral," Osei said. "Draconis fleet stand down, all wings. No weapons fire log from either side, the entire engagement." He looked up and something in his face made the number land harder than any digit could have. "It's over. Nobody fired a shot." Maddox let out a breath she'd apparently been holding since the reserve wing arrived. 2,000 some ships in one patch of sky, and not one of them so much as charged a capacitor. "That was the point," Rourke said. He set the watch down against the console. "Just for a second. The way a man sets down something he's been carrying so his hand can rest. 287 years, and the whole plan was never to win a fight. It was to make sure nobody was foolish enough to start one." He picked the watch back up and pressed it once more to his ear before he did anything else. On the Senate station, the chamber's massive floor display had stopped moving entirely, both fleets frozen in the formation they'd held for the last unbearable stretch of minutes, and into that stillness Elder Seraphine finally rose from her seat. 534 years old, and she had never once stood to speak without being recognized first. She stood now. "Nobody in this chamber is owed an apology," she said, and her voice carried the way old voices sometimes do, without needing volume. "We voted the way frightened people vote, when they've mistaken quiet for weakness. The human systems didn't hide a fleet from us because they wanted to deceive this Senate." Aboard the Vanguard, Rourke walked the short distance to the forward viewport, past Maddox's empty ration wrapper and Vex's abandoned data slate, and looked out at the crescent his fleet still held, unmoving, unfired. They hid it because they understood something about waiting that the rest of us never had to learn. Thren stood beside her, stylus still in his pocket, and said nothing, because for once there was nothing procedural left to say. Exactly where it had been since the 14th second of an emergent sequence that had ended a war before it started one. He thought briefly of a man in a ship with less fuel than the crossing needed, who had never gotten to see any of this. Somewhere behind him, unnoticed by anyone but himself, a second small thing happened that would matter more later than it seemed to now. Osei, still logging. "We were always ready, Dad," he thought, and didn't say it aloud, because there was no one on that bridge who needed to hear it to understand what it meant. Flagged the full transmission record, every word from both commanders, and filed it not under a mission designation, but under a name he made up on the spot, the Veilfall record. Nobody told him to. He just thought, correctly, that somebody would want it someday. "Admiral," Vex said, "Sector Command wants your statement for the record. Officially this time, whatever you want history to have." Rourke didn't turn from the viewport right away. He thought about the 6 words he'd already given Dravon on the open channel, and decided they didn't need company. "Tell them the fleet held," he said. "Tell them it's called the Shadow Fleet." Then he unstrapped it from his wrist, the leather worn soft from 31 years of the same motion, the crystal still carrying its old hairline crack, and held it flat in his open palm. the same way his father had held it once. Tell them it waited 287 years for one moment, and it only needed the one. He checked the watch a final time. 47 ticks, steady as it had ever been, on a bridge with far less certainty and far more fuel to worry about, before the first human ship had ever left the solar system to find out what was out there. The bridge around him had gone quiet in the particular way that follows the end of something enormous. Not silence exactly, just the absence of anything left that needed saying. Outside the viewport, the crescent held its shape a while longer. Ships arranged not for war but simply for the fact of being seen, and then slowly, without a single order that anyone on either side needed to give twice, both fleets began, at last, to turn for home. The watch sat in Rourke's palm, ticking 47 times a minute, exactly as it always had. It didn't need to do anything else.